Hello everyone, Memory here. In the previous episode, we just got out of the story and finished the 3rd Ascendancy trial. In this episode, we're gonna go all the way to Sirus. Now, as I went through the footages, I realized that I've made many mistakes and bought quite a bit of unnecessary things, which ended up costing me 10 exalt worth of extra expense. And if I talk about those mistakes, the video is just gonna be long and boring. So instead, this video is gonna be more like a complete guide for this build, because I feel like it is polished enough to be a solid build. So let's start with our core mechanic, the Blast Chain Mine plus Trap support on Reap. This is achieved by using a Tremor Rod, which makes our main skill a 7-link. As mentioned in the previous video, using Reap linked with those two supports will throw out a mine first, which when detonated will throw out traps that uses Reap. Note that in terms of damage increase, this skill is counted as a trap skill. Now there are 3 main reasons that makes this mechanic good. First is the double dip. Even though the damage does not double dip, for example the damage increase in the Trap+Mine damage support will only apply the trap part. But pretty much everything else can be double dipped. The major one being Swift Assembly, where you have a chance to throw out multiple traps or mines. This gives us a chance to throw out multiple mines first, and each of the mines will have their own chance to throw out multiple traps, essentially giving us the effect of cluster trap plus multiple traps without the damage reduction on those supports. Similarly, having efficient explosive passive and perfect crime ascendancy passive will give us a chance to first detonate mines a second time, and then each trap has their own chance to be triggered twice as well. Now, because Skitterbot guarantees the mine to trigger twice already, so the main function of efficient explosive is actually reducing reservation of mines, which I will talk more about later. Other things like gaining power charges with Blast Cascade, getting Arcane Surge with Arcane Pyrotechnics, and the traps and mine throwing speed on Guerrilla Tactics are doubling their effects the same way on this build as well. Second reason is that the traps that are spit out of the mine has auto aiming, which not only makes us not having to worry too much about where to place the mines, but it also makes the traps more packed together while dealing single target damage, which is the main purpose of using Reap. Third reason is the damage increase on Volatile Mine and the crit increase on successive detonation will work on this skill. Even though I said this skill is counted as trap when it comes to damage increase, these 2 super powerful mine passives is an exception because of how it functions, and both of them together increases our overall DPS by around 20%, which is very nice. And yes, because of the way they provide damage, it will also boost our Exsanguinate traps, even though it is not supported by Blast Chain Mines. So you can juice up your map clear strength by alternating both skills if you need to. Here you might have a question. Throwing mines that throws traps that uses skills, wouldn't that take too long before the damage comes out? The answer is yes at the start, but we can solve that by investing into triggering speed, throwing speed, and chain reaction ascendancy. The passive that we need to get anyways already gives us enough of all those stats, so you won't actually feel the damage delay in practice, compared to pure trap or pure mine builds. I've done all the boring min-max in this build, so if you follow the POE down in the description carefully, you don't have to worry about it. One small detail here is we're using Anomalous Swift Assembly on Exsanguinate, because in some situations you will want your traps to trigger when no enemies are triggering it. Anomalous Swift Assembly has 40% reduced trap duration, so combining with one set and forget cluster skill, we have 65 reduced trap duration, which is decent. And yes, the Sunblast belt has 80% reduced trap duration, which is better than using Anomalous Swift Assembly, but it is overall more effective for this build to use the belt slot for resistance and life. That's why we use Anomalous Swift Assembly here. We use the normal Swift Assembly for Reap because, as mentioned above, it has auto aiming, so it is almost guaranteed to trigger as soon as it lands. Next up is the survivability issue. We went low life and Saboteur is naturally low on life pool, so even with a decent amount of investment into life, I'm still currently walking around with 2000 life. But I guarantee you this character is above average when it comes to tanking damage. It has phase acrobatics for dodge. I used Jade Flask plus the blind from Born in the Shadow Ascendancy for huge evasion boost. It has around 80% projectile evade chance from arrow dancing since we take more range damage with our playstyle. Then of course it has Wind Dancer for the damage reduction when you do get hit. These are the basics. To get even more damage reduction, we use Spore Guard body armor. It gives us fungal ground when we are stationary, which reduces enemies' damage by 10% when they stand on it. We've got Steel Skin that pretty much doubles our effective life pool when we take a big hit. We pick the Soul of Solaris for Pantheon, which has a lot of different damage reduction as well. Petrified Blood also naturally gives us some overall damage reduction from hits. And with 2 endurance charges crafted on our rings and amulets, plus Rumi's Flask, we have 26% physical damage reduction, which is pretty high for a Saboteur to have. We also have Taste of Hate to reduce physical damage and cold damage taken. With all those damage reduction, we very rarely get one-shotted. Now when we do get low on HP, it will be very easy to reduce our life even further from using our skills since they cost life instead of mana. And we will die very easily to any random sources of damage before we get our life back up. To combat this, we use Forbidden Taste Flask with use when you take a savage hit. Savage hit refers to any hit that's more than 15% of your max HP. And because we are low life, it means 30% for us instead. Using this flask will instantly fill us with full HP. This means as long as we don't get one-shotted and we still have charges on this flask, we are immortal. You can almost view it as 2 charges of death prevention and can be charged by killing mobs. As you can see here, I flame dash into a 4-pack of those stupid spiked chickens that appear out of nowhere in a tier 16 map, and I survived it by taking a sip of all 3 of my defensive flasks, because I have the use when you take savage hit enchant on all 3 of them. Note that you can get the worst roll on Forbidden Taste and still have the exact same effect as a perfect one, because the worst roll is recovering 75% of max HP, but we only have 50% at all times. Now it does have a downside of taking 25% of your maximum life per second as chaos damage during the flask duration, so don't give this flask any quality because it will just make the degen last longer. With that said, we can completely mitigate the degen by having max chaos resist and a lot of life regen. That is why we are also taking Method of Madness for the chaos resistance. As for our life regen, we get them from Stone Golem, Vitality Aura, and a Watchstone that increases life regen while affected by Vitality. These life regens are already enough to stop the degen. But on top of that, we also have up to another 10% total life regen from Pyromaniac. So even if we are in the flask effect duration, we still have enough life regen for combat purposes. The other 2 flasks I use are Diamond Flask and Jade Flask for bleed and freeze removal. They are also automated by the flask enchant, so I never really have to worry about using any flask at all. With all that regen, some of you might think of using Righteous Fire to get even more damage. And yes, this build does have enough regen to combat the degen from Righteous Fire and Forbidden Taste together. However, you will need to continuously throw out traps to keep Pyromaniac at max stack for it to work. And you also have to take out Enlightened Support and reserve 7% more life to free up the socket for Righteous Fire. Yes, you will have around double your DPS when you also turn on Val Righteous Fire. As you can see on the screen, I have around 48,000 tooltip damage, and when I'm in combat with Righteous Fire, it fluctuates around 100,000, and when I turn on Val Righteous Fire, the highest point actually reach over 160,000. But that means you are now vulnerable to any source of damage over time and fire resist reduction. Like here, my fire resist is reduced by the boss and I reached 1 HP just from my own degen, which turned my righteous fire off and I was very close to stepping into the lava floor and die. So unless you are confident with your POE skills, don't use righteous fire. As for reducing the cost of your skills, efficient, explosive, and charisma can reduce the mine reservations. Anomalous trap and mine damage also reduces the cost, so I have it on both Reap and Exsanguinate. This pairing with our super high life regen, you won't really feel the life cost at all. Speaking of reservation, this build uses 5 auras, reserving 97% of your mana and 50% of your life. We need to use Anomalous Arrogance and Enlighten on Skitterbots and Vitality for our life reservation, which is socketed on the Devouring Diadem that further reduces 20% reservation for socketed gems. This helmet is mandatory for this build because it also gives us Eldritch Battery so we can reserve all of our mana and not having to worry about the cost of Flame Dash. You need to get the one that has Chaos Resistance as its Wild mod because we need it for the Forbidden Taste as mentioned above. The other 3 auras are Zealotry, Herald of Purity, and Petrified Blood, which are all for damage boost. I've got Assassin's Mark over here because the Apply Assassin's Mark when you hit rare monsters mod does not work for this build since you are not the one hitting, the traps are. However, the Vulnerability on Hit mod does work because it does not specify you have to be the one hitting, so I have that on one of my rings. For our helmet enchant, the Assassin's Mark increase effect gives us the most damage boost for single targets, so that's what I used. And yes, we are using 2 curses, so we need to anoint Whisper of Doom on one of the 3 anointment spots we have. Amulet is one, our armor and gloves are blighted uniques, which can also be anointed. So I also anointed the most powerful life passive, Constitution, and Volatile Mines. Volatile Mines gives us increased mine detonate speed and damage increase as mentioned earlier. Finally, let's have a look at the main skill links. I use Anomalous Reap for some minor crit chance increase. Same with Anomalous Trap support that gives us some extra damage. You don't need to use alternate quality for these 2 gems, but this build is already an expensive build, so I decided to spend the extra chaos to make it look nicer. Then we have Swift Assembly, Brutality, Anomalous Trap and Mine damage for the cost reduction, and a level 4 in power. Now level 4 in power is super expensive. I bought it for 9x, which makes it the most expensive item on this build. If you don't have it, use Hypothermia instead. It is better than level 3 in power but worse than level 4. Here I should also mention the second most expensive item I have, the +1/+1 amulet. Because none of the cheap and already made +1 physical +1 strength amulets on the market fits my need at the time, so I ended up making it myself. The 2 amulets cost 1x each and the Awakener's Orb is 3.5x, bringing the total cost to 5.5x. This is the first time I make this kind of amulet, and although it is expensive, it does provide a huge boost to my DPS, so if you have the currency, this is probably a must-have for this build. As for our Exsanguinate, we use Divergent Exsanguinates for the extra 2 targets, which is very noticeable when it comes to clearing large packs of mobs. Anomalous Trap and Mine damage and trap support, here again, same reason as above. Then we have Anomalous Swift Assembly here for the reduced trap duration, Chain for the clear speed, and Anomalous Multiple Trap for the extra 5 trap limit. The extra trap limit is important here because the maximum trap limit is shared between both skills. So if you already have the maximum number of traps for Reap on the ground, which is 19, and you throw out 3 Exsanguinate traps, the 3 of the Reap traps will be destroyed. Having the extra 5 trap limit on Exsanguinate means you can throw out another 5 Exsanguinate traps without destroying any Reap traps, which increases your overall DPS and makes the build smoother to play. And that's it for the build. The rest of the details that I haven't mentioned in the video should all be in the POE down in the description. This build cost me around 40x in total. I'm not too happy about the build costing that much, but I did defeat Sirus and Maven using this build. It is immune to blind, shock and ignite, it can deal with freeze and bleed, it can do reflect mods, and it can kill mobs in proximity shield as a ranged character. It has high clear speed as well as high single target DPS, and it is also super tanky as a build that is able to tank Sirus laser beams. Just look at me dodging the Sirus skills. If I'm able to defeat Sirus with this build, I'm pretty sure most of the people can do Sirus with this build as well. The only real weakness for this character is reduced life regen, or no life regen mods, since it is the core mechanic for this build. Also, the character does not have high movement speed, but that can be fixed with more currency. However, I'm already very happy with the build and I want to save some currency to see if I can make another build before the league ends. And if I am to spend more currency on the build, I would want to get more damage because I feel like it should have more damage if it is going to be this expensive. So tell me in the comment down below what you think about this build. I know there are many of you out there have better ideas on how to improve the build. There are already a few people showing me their ideas on improving some of my previous builds, which looks very impressive. Anyways, that's it for today. Subscribe for extra mirror drop chance. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.